Hi, YouTube. Coming to you today from snow-covered Greensboro, North Carolina. We have had a fantastic day so far. Snow. We've already been out sledding with the kids, and it was loads of fun. And we've also had pumpkin spice waffles for breakfast. And today's topic is friendship. Now, I've heard from a lot of former witnesses that we struggle with friendships. Finding friends, keeping friends, and being friends all seem to be problematic. I honestly think that even for the most normal, well-adjusted, non-brainwashed individual, friendships are still difficult to initiate the older and busier we get. For us former J-dubs, they can seem impossible. I mean, I've always been pretty good at making friends, at least in the witness sense, because friendship means something else entirely when you're a Jehovah's Witness than it does when you're out in the real world. There are whole levels of social interaction that you just don't get when you're raised Jehovah's Witness. There are nuances that you just can't sense and frequencies that you can't hear when it comes to friendships. When you're raised on the inside, your upbringing can permanently handicap your ability to cultivate normal friendships. And don't even get me started on romantic relationships. I've already kind of done a video about that, but I think there might be more to come on that particular subject. Anyway, like everything else that we weren't allowed to have, friendships are rife with unrealistic expectations for the Jehovah's Witness kid. I mean, we never learned to interact with anyone without an agenda. Bring them into the truth or test their faith, something like that. But never, ever real friendship. Never. We don't know what that looks like. So that means that even when we get out, not only do we not really have real friends, we don't really know how to be real friends. We tend to be self-absorbed, poor listeners, with either an inability to let anyone really get close to us or else a tendency to glom on and just smother people. We have to unlearn these behaviors and thought patterns in order to be successful at normal friendship. In short, y'all, we just don't know how to act. Here's a pro tip. Love bombing is not healthy. Okay? Because you can't sustain that. Boundaries, however, are very healthy. Anyway, why am I talking about this? Well, I have a very specific and very personal reason for this video, which we will get to in a minute. But first, I want to make a few preparatory remarks about my own friendship history. Now, my first best friend was literally the only girl of my age in our congregation. The only one. And the only reason that we were allowed to be friends is because our mothers were friends. And by friends, I mean they didn't despise each other. When my father was disfellowshipped, though, our friendship ended right then and there. Now, so that's one example. But when I was in school, as a kid, I would either be invited to play with a worldly kid outside of school or else bullied mercilessly by another set of worldly kids or even some of the Jehovah's Witness kids sometimes. My mother would always give me this look that said what a really disappointing idiot I was. And she would say, you know, you can't really expect people to be friends with you. You are not like them and you never will be. Just get over it. What she meant by that, I'm really not sure, but it does do a number on the old self-esteem, you know. And it is hard to find friends as a young Jehovah's Witness. Part of the reason is because, as I've already alluded to, the candidate pool is very, very limited. I mean, there are usually very few options in any given congregation to begin with. And to be friends, you have to be the same gender, the same spirituality level, the same socioeconomic status, really, and sometimes the same race, although that really does depend on where you are geographically. I found that many times witness kids like to lure each other into misbehavior so that they could have dirt on everyone, which they would then spill whenever they got caught in some wrongdoing to lessen their punishment, sort of like a misguided plea deal, I guess. I don't know. I found many times that my attempts at friendship were brought to an end by endless gossip, which even the adults in the congregation gleefully took part, and by the fact that we were all conditioned to be loyal only to the organization and not to each other or our families or anything. What does that mean? Well, my mother grilled me on a regular basis. And if there was even a hint that I might know something about some other young person in the congregation, I would be dragged into the library after the next meeting to confess to the elders. Once you've been seen in there a few times by the other kids in the hall and not reproved or disfellowshipped immediately, after that, people would start to notice and they would stop being nice to you at all. It doesn't matter if you're there by choice or if you're dragged against your will by an overzealous and mentally ill mother. It doesn't matter. The effect is the same. So, to recap, either my witness friends were living a double life but completely willing to throw anyone else under the bus, even the person they partied with the day before, to save their own hide, or they were so completely devoid of interest and personality as to be insufferable. For example, hey, let's hang out this weekend. Okay, sure. What should we do? Let's prepare for the Watchtower study. I have new highlighters. Doesn't that sound like fun? Oh, shoot me. So, as a witness teenage girl, you are not, and I repeat, not allowed to be friends with a brother, young or otherwise. I remember there was a boy in our congregation at one point he was slightly younger than me, maybe a couple years younger. And I remember him as kind of chubby and quiet, but really sweet. And he had this profoundly handicapped older sister who they would bring to the meetings, and he would always shout and make noise during the meetings, or she ground her teeth really loud. But he was always so gentle with her. And he was just a really, really kind boy. His name was Micah. And once there was a gathering for the congregation at someone's house, and he brought his violin. Now, of course, none of the other kids were interested in this whatsoever. So while the other kids did whatever they did, the two of us were in the living room. We were probably, I want to say like maybe 14, 15-ish. And while the other kids were doing their thing, the two of us went in the living room, which did not even have doors, we ended up playing Pachelbel's Canon. And he was on the violin, I was on the piano, and I'd been taking piano lessons my whole life, and apparently he had done violin at some point. But it was awesome, and I loved it, and we had so much fun. And we got counseled, or at least I did, because we were off by ourselves in the living room, in the open. Yeah. The very suggestion that there was something wrong with that, or that maybe we should be dating or preparing for marriage, sent me running for the hills, because it was really not like that at all. We didn't even have a chance to be friends or get to know each other. But in the years since then, I have often thought about him and wondered whatever happened to him. I feel like he was a very rare kind of good person. And I hope that wherever he is in life, Jehovah's Witness or not, I hope that he's happy and that he's found a happy life for himself, because he was pretty great. Anyway, when I was in middle school, I became friends with a girl in our congregation, and she was a little shy, but she too had a very overbearing mother, and I think we bonded over that, and also the fact that we loved art, and we loved fairy tales and fantasy novels, which we would sneak from the library and pass back and forth at school because we weren't supposed to be reading them. And while my mom didn't look at what books I read, her mom did. So she probably to this day is one of the closest friends I've ever had. But you already know from my other videos about my existential crisis my senior year of high school. So you probably have an idea of where this is going. Anyway, my junior year in high school, we were both dating people that our parents did not exactly approve of. I had a worldly boyfriend, and he was, I've mentioned him before, he was a tortured artist with these really thick glasses and the social grace of a concrete block. I mean, But his medium of choice was comic books, and all the women he drew looked kind of like RuPaul. That probably should have told me something, but anyway. Her boyfriend was a Jehovah's Witness, but he was black. Obviously, she was not. Well, I think there's another video to come at some point on the topic of racism within the witnesses, because I got a lot to say about that too. It's there. And pretty revolting. But anyway, there was a sort of combination art project field trip that year where all of the art students at our school went to a neighboring high school where my boyfriend happened to be a student, and I think her boyfriend maybe was a student there as well. But anyway, they were both of our boyfriends were there at the event too. So while we're there, my friend gives me this long letter because, back then we wrote each other long, elaborately folded letters on notebook paper because we didn't have cell phones or texting back then because I'm old. And she gave me a speech on top of that about how I was in danger of being bad association because I was dating this worldly boy and how I really needed to stop and get my act together. But then on the heels of that, at the same event, almost in the same breath, she's all flushed and flustered about her boyfriend. And when I asked her, like, what's going on? She said that he had just gone down on her in an empty classroom. And oh my God, like total teenage girl stuff, as if that was perfectly fine. Which for the record, it probably was. I mean, looking back on it, yeah, sure. What's the problem? It's kids. They're consensual. They're happy. Whatever. But at the time, no, that really wasn't okay. I mean, I wasn't doing anything even close to that level of immorality at the time. And I was really seriously taken aback that she'd be counseling me about my relationship choices in the same breath, talking about something like that. Like, whoa. And that should have told me something too, but it didn't. So if you're sensing a theme here, it's that I can be a little slow on the uptake sometimes. Anyway, she had some really hard times with her mother, who was also engaging in some pretty bad behavior from a Jehovah's Witness perspective. Well, really from any perspective, but I won't go into that. I didn't find out all the details of that until much later, but it got so bad at home for her that my friend had made these plans to run away from home with her boyfriend. And I don't know what their plan really was or if they really even had one, but she talked to me about it. And I talked her into letting me, because I had a car, come pick her up because I didn't want her to get hurt. So my older sister, also ran away from home as a teenager. And so I had a little experience with what can happen to runaways. And I didn't want any of that for my friend. So long story short, I go over there, middle of the night, and her mom actually caught her climbing out of her bedroom window and comes barreling around the house just as my friend is diving into my car. And my friend is screaming at me, drive, drive, drive. But her mom is like jumping out in front of the car. So, of course, I stopped. And I remember looking at her and saying, I'm not going to run over your mother, dude. I'm not going to do that. So we end up sitting at their kitchen table, middle of the night, and her mom is just yelling at me. And she says, does your mother know where you are? And I said, well, kind of not really. Like, she's in the bed, but I left her a note in case she wakes up. And I explained that my plan was to go back to my house, to take my friend back to my house with me, and to have her call home in the morning and explain the situation. And her mom sneered at me and was like, what makes you think that you can handle a situation like this? And I told her, well, at least with my plan, you know where your daughter is and what happened to her. Because if I wasn't here, I want you to imagine who might have been. And that did not go over well at all, as you might imagine. So fast forward a year from then, and we were getting ready, we were preparing for graduation, and I had this epiphany that I talked about in another video, and things were really weird for me. But my mother actually went all out to plan this graduation party for me and to invite people from lots of different Kingdom Halls in the area that we knew. And she had hired a caterer, she got a DJ, everything. So this was like a huge event. So I was so excited about it. And of course, I talk about it with my best friend all the time. And this is when she, my best friend, and her mother started this rumor throughout our hall and the neighboring halls that I was inviting the whole senior class at the high school, and that my party was not for the witness kids, and that they should all come to her graduation party, which they held on the same night at the same time on purpose. And somehow nobody told it. We never heard it. We never heard about it beforehand. Now, this whole time, this girl, my best friend, hung out with me like always and basically lied about it, about what she was doing for months while these parties were being planned. I talked about it. I was so excited. And she was all in, man, knowing what she was doing. So when it came time for my party, there were like 10 people there. Mostly my relatives and a few worldly friends that I had actually invited on my own. Just a few. I think one of them was Mr. James, my favorite teacher on earth. And, of course, my boyfriend and a few friends that I had actually gotten close to. And we had this huge room and a DJ and a buffet and the whole 9 yards. And there was like one family that came from the Kingdom Hall because the other party, the wholesome Jehovah's Witness party, didn't allow small children, and she had small children, so she came to mine, and sucked, man. The party part wasn't even the worst of it. The worst of it was the betrayal for absolutely no good reason. The closest friend I ever had completely stabbed me in the back. And of course, the catering was non-refundable. There was nothing we could do about anything at that point, except, we noticed that at the same place where we were having our event, there was another event for Down syndrome kids and mentally disabled kids. Now, it might have been a graduation party for the alternative school or something. I can't remember. I forget what it was called, but anyway, theirs was a low budget affair. They did not have refreshments. They didn't have music or anything. So after about an hour at my party, my mom and I walked over to their area and talked to their group leader and invited them to a graduation party at the other end of the hall. So we actually ended up having a pretty good time with the Down syndrome kids. They had the time of their lives. They came in, they danced, we had a great time, and that was actually the proudest that I have ever been of my mother. She could be a real bitch sometimes, but man, every once in a while she got it right, and that was a cool thing. We turned it around. It still hurt though. I haven't thought about it too much in years, but we'll get to the reason in a minute why I'm talking about this. So the last meeting that I attended at my Kingdom Hall was the next day, a Sunday, and I had not been to a meeting in a really long time because, as I've discussed before, I was really struggling at that point with whether or not I believed any of it. But I went that day because I wanted to see her. I wanted her to see my face. And she avoided me. Her mother didn't. Her mother actually came up to me outside the door at the Kingdom Hall after the meeting. The cojones of this woman, I'm telling you. She walks up to me with this, teary-eyed, "I'm so sorry." And I just looked at her. I said, "Yep, you sure are." And I never went back. So now we get to the point. Well, lo and behold, 20 years later, I get a random private message on social media from my old friend saying that she misses me and how much she misses having a real friend. And she has clearly fallen on some hard times. She's very unhappy in her marriage to the same high school boyfriend that I mentioned earlier. She says she's in love with someone else and has nowhere to turn. And of course, I think she got married right out of high school. She never went to college, never lived on her own. Anyway, I've been talking to her on private message for a couple of months whenever she contacts me. And for obvious reasons, I'm really conflicted about it. You know, on one hand, I missed her too. I mean, I loved her. She honestly broke my heart much worse than any boyfriend ever did. I mean, on the other hand, I am completely stunned that she would dare contact me without at least acknowledging or addressing what she did. But it's like it never happened. Like that was the end of a at least 10-year friendship. I mean, just like that. And we never talked about it. Like we never talked again. But then I remember the way I thought, or rather the way I did not think, when I was a Jehovah's Witness. And I know that she thinks that I, as a worldly person now, will not blink an eye at betrayal and adultery or whatever. I do, however, blink quite a bit at this situation. And it irks me a bit that she will pour out her problems to me on private message like nothing at all has changed. But she won't friend me on Facebook and probably wouldn't acknowledge me in any way in the real world were we to see each other. I mean, it really bothers me that this whole interaction is on her terms entirely. But then, if she's looking for a way out, shouldn't I help her? I mean, shouldn't I, as someone who has slogged that miserable path before? I don't know. I don't know because I don't really want out of the witnesses, or if she just wants someone to support her doing what she wants to do. I don't know. Of course, all of this might be a moot point anyway, because in our last conversation, I said that, look, if she is that unhappy and she's really in love with someone else, and I don't know if this someone else is a witness or worldly, or I have no information on that. But if that's really the way she feels, I feel like she should leave. She should follow her heart. She should do what she wants to do. We only get one life, and it's a shame to waste it. I think that we deserve to be as happy as we can in life. And I told her that, look, because she said, if I get disfellowshipped, nobody will help me, and I can't support myself. And I said, well, I've been disfellowshipped for a really long time, and it is not the end of the world. And that if she's so very unhappy where she is, she might find that things are actually better on the other side. They are. Just a hint. But since that conversation, she has not replied to me. She's not spoken to me at all. So that might be the end of it. Again.